We will never probably know the full extent of what's called the grooming gangs or the grooming scandal, but it does seem to be growing weight now for some form of public inquiry. Remember Professor Alexis Jay, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, published just over 2 years ago. They concluded there that England and Wales are suffering from an epidemic of child sexual abuse. Her investigation ran for 7 years, heard from thousands of victims, some as young as 12, describing horrifying levels of abuse over many decades and total ignorance at times of the police and other authorities. They simply weren't interested. Some young girls were told to come back when they weren't drunk. Yes, you did hear that correctly. And then, of course, the recommendations, 20 of them, to stop exploitation, including a legal requirement on those working with children to report sexual abuse with criminal sanctions. None of them come into place. Now they are moving, the government says it's, quotes, working at pace. No cover for the Conservatives here, by the way, I hasten to add. Please don't think I'm offering this for a moment, because, as I said, these recommendations were made over 2 years ago. So it's a bit rich, isn't it, for Kemi Badenoch, Robert Jenrick, and I think Ms Phillips to be saying, we need a public inquiry. Well, until July of last year, you could have commissioned that with considerable ease. Now the Prime Minister enters it, and I'm asking you if you, like me, think we probably... And I'm not a fan of public inquiries. They go on and on and on. I think we're still waiting for the Post Office scandal. We're still waiting for the Grenfell disaster inquiry. And all the victims deserve their day, of course they do. But my goodness me, oh, almighty, how long does it take? Now, the Prime Minister enters the fray. He spoke publicly for the first time yesterday after a row erupted over his own handling the grooming gangs. Remember, of course, he was in a prominent legal position. The richest man in the world, Elon Musk, had blamed him for being complicit in the rape of Britain, his words not mine, during his tenure as DPP. He was at an event in a hospital in Surrey. Sir Keir sought to defend his record, but took a swipe at politicians jumping on the bandwagon of the far right and, interestingly, explicitly not naming Elon Musk, accused the billionaire of spreading lies.
This government will get on with the job of protecting victims, but what I won't tolerate is this discussion and debate based on lies without calling it out. What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention. When the poison of the far right leads to serious threats to Ms Phillips and others, then in my book, a line has been crossed. Because those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves.
No, I think we're interested in trying to find out what the truth is, might be. Now, his comments have come under widespread condemnation from opposition parties. Later that day, when his Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was in the Commons to announce a new law cracking down on child sex abuse, yes, this was recommended more than 2 years ago, and ignored by the Conservatives. But her opposite number, Tory Ms Phillips, used his response to criticise the PM, but he was met with groans and heckles from the Labour side.
It is not far right to stand up for victims of mass rape. And smearing people.
Order.
It's those concerns.
Shadows. People want to hear the statement. Ms Phillips.
Smearing people who raise those issues is exactly how this ended up getting covered up in the first place.
Well, talking about cover-up, let's go into the conversation. Maggie Oliver, who was a police detective with Greater Manchester, investigated the Rochdale grooming gangs, indeed was the whistleblower, and a lot of credit to her for continuing with that, and is the founder and chair of the Maggie Oliver Foundation. Always good to have you on, Maggie Oliver. I understand overnight you've been fairly critical or condemning of the current situation. I'm afraid I didn't hear that. Just repeat for the benefit of my listeners what you've been saying. Good morning.
Good morning. I've said a lot, actually. I've done a lot of interviews in the last few days. I don't really think I need to say very much. That statement that I've just heard again from Keir Starmer, for me, is an indication of why we are in this position. Grooming gangs has been a constant in my life for 20 years. I am not a far-right extremist. I gave 16 years of my life to the police, and I was devastated when I had to resign because nobody wanted to hear. And I would also say, Nick, that at the very moment when I was working on that Rochdale case, things have moved on for me since then. I run my own charity, so I'm not talking just about the past. But I think because we're talking about, the road to here, at the time, and I want to keep it to specifics, not to the politics. At the time of the Rochdale case, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and I was forced to resign because I massively disagreed with how those victims in Rochdale were being treated. You know, a little girl who was 12 when the rapes began, by a horrendous grooming gang, rape gang, people are calling them now. She got pregnant when she was just 13. We had a fetus and DNA. Even her rapist was not charged with rape. And I cannot believe for one single second that Keir Starmer, who claims to be responsible for that case being a success, I cannot believe he didn't know that. Another victim, criminalised, a child being raped, put on an indictment in secret, and she was portrayed as an older madam. 10 years later, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police has apologised to those victims and said that case was borderline incompetent. So I'm trying to keep this to the specifics, and blackening the names of people who dare to say that these children have been monumentally failed by successive governments is actually deflecting from the issues which are at the centre of this whole issue. And, you've mentioned Elon Musk. I think that the value of what he's said has brought an international spotlight onto this issue. And that is what was needed, because it blows up for 5 minutes and it goes away. And the victims and the survivors should be front and centre of what we're saying.
Is it your view, Maggie, that you've referenced to Keir Starmer, when he was DPP, he was incompetent, he was naive, he was asleep at the wheel, he didn't investigate enough? What would you say? You're a former police officer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to just pull this into individuals, but because he was the Director of Public Prosecutions, he is front and centre. For me, the book stops at the top. And when I know that Nazir Afzal, who was the Chief Crown Prosecutor, revealed in 2018 that when Keir Starmer was DPP, the Home Office sent out a circular to all police forces telling them not to investigate these crimes, I cannot avoid the fact that at the top, as the person responsible at the top of the CPS, to send out such a direction, the book has to stop with him. And the comments he made yesterday really made me feel that he is out of touch with the mood of the country yet again. People now know what's happened.
Yes.
Those years ago, nobody did.
And credit to you for all the work you've done. Maggie, I've got to let you go now. I can hear the passion in your voice. I always enjoy speaking with your founder and chair of the Maggie Oliver Foundation and your former great GMP detective. Thank you for that. 13 after 7. So that's very much the police side of it. So look at the other side of the legal coin, the lawyers and the solicitors and barristers. David Greenwood is head of the Child Abuse Department at Switalskis Solicitors. They act for victims of sexual grooming gangs, including the Rotherham case. How supportive of you are the idea of a public inquiry, Mr. Greenwood? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not terribly supportive of the idea. Those who have been paying attention to this over the years know generically how grooming happens and what has gone on. We have had an inquiry, the national inquiry run by Professor Alexis Jay, which specifically looked at grooming gangs, and that wasn't designed to look at the extent of it or how it happens. It was designed to look at responses of organisations and how we can improve those responses. That was a targeted use of resources. A larger inquiry to determine how it's been happening, where and when over the last 2 or 3 decades would not be the best use of public money, in my opinion.
Even if Maggie Oliver is right and there's been extraordinary naivety or deliberate ignorance of the facts?
Well, that's for people like me and other lawyers to delve into, to try and...
But a public inquiry would give them statutory powers, of course, Mr. Greenwood. That I'm not for a moment disputing your legal skills, but you don't have the powers of a statutory inquiry.
No, we don't have the powers of statutory inquiry. We don't have the resources. But what's it going to add? It's going to simply take ages. It's going to be an excuse for successive governments to kick this can down the road. We need to get on with implementing the recommendations of Alexis Jay's inquiry.